Soy Héctor 3.
Héctor 2.
Héctor 1. Soy Héctor 3.
Héctor 2.
Héctor 1. Soy Héctor 3.
Héctor 2.
Héctor 1. Soy Héctor 3.
Hello, buenos dias, and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, the podcast trapped in its own time loop right along with the movies we discuss. This season, we're discussing Triangle and Timecrimes. I'm your host, Bubbawheat, and in this episode, we are discussing the second half of the second loop in Timecrimes that starts at 52 minutes and 28 seconds with Hector hearing a scream off in the distance, and ends at 70 minutes and 19 seconds with Hector taking his sweater off just before the lid closes on the time machine. Joining me today is Ashley from Cinema Recall. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So it's a pleasure to have you on here today. It's really the first time that we've had a chance to talk. I've known Vern for not quite as long as you have, but I've known Vern for quite a while now. I think nearly 10 years at this point for me.
I've double that, and that's what I've got under my belt with Vern.
Yeah, but I'm glad that he put me in touch with you, and got you, and you agreed to watch this film and talk with me in my little time loop format, just kind of diving in on this smaller chunk of this movie. And I know that you told me before that you haven't quite finished the movie, so you haven't seen the ending, but since I know this is your first experience with the film, what do you think about, the film, not quite overall, obviously, but, up to this point, which is almost the end. You only have about 15-20 minutes left.
Yeah. Looking and watching the preview, I wasn't expecting it to be that good. I thought the way they cut the preview, I was like, oh, this is going to be like really cheesy, and maybe I'm not going to like it, and maybe I try not to be too judgmental, but I really like it. Like, it's really good. I'm really impressed, and I'm excited to watch the last 15 to 20 minutes. So I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix of not really, like, it has a little bit of a horror movie, but kind of a bit more of a thriller vibe to it. And there's also
like a suspense.
And it also reminds me a little bit of like Compliance, because there's a lot of doing things just because you're told to do them or just because you know that it happened already.
Yeah, yep.
We're going to go ahead and get started, talking about this clip, or this section of the loop. I decided to break it up in the middle just to give an extra episode, and I think that this split is a good point to split this second loop into, because the first half of this loop is mainly Hector 2 interacting with Hector 1, and then the second half of the loop is more Hector 2 interacting with Hector 3, even though for the most part he doesn't yet realize, except at the very end, that this is kind of him interacting with Hector 3 to a certain extent. So it starts off with him, like, right after he sits down, he hears this unnamed woman scream off in the distance. So he knows that she is, awake from being unconscious. And so he goes to look to see where she is, and he sees that she's gone, but he does find her necklace just off to the side. And we get this slight little flashback just to show him remembering that she's wearing it. And I think it's interesting that, seeing her in this, very, very brief flashback, it does kind of focuses on her and, like, her naked chest. And I think that's interesting because, the first time that Hector sees her is through the binoculars, and that's really like a male gaze view of her. And then the second time, whenever it's whenever we see the other perspective of Hector 2 forcing her to take off her clothes, the nudity it's very underrepresented. Like it's very minimized because I feel like we're seeing it from his perspective, and Hector 2 at that point, he's more interested in Hector 1.
Right. And setting up what he remembers seeing the first time. Yeah.
And then now that he's seeing it in his memory, like he's getting a clearer picture, and I feel like that's why kind of we focus, like we get a clear shot of her breasts again, because it is it's returning a little bit to the male gaze because it is going like from Hector's perspective, and we're seeing it through his memory. And he sees the necklace in his memory, but he also kind of because he's not exactly in the moment, he remembers it a bit more fondly. So we get this slight return of the male gaze of this unnamed woman.
Right. Oh, I was going to say, I didn't realize that, and maybe I looked down or missed that tiny part, because when I hear the scream, but I didn't realize that he ran off to find her. I looked up, and then he was just picking up a necklace, and then he was remembering her with the necklace on. So I didn't realize that he ran back to the rock, or wherever he had left her. And honestly, I thought she was dead. I was like, oh, she's dead. Okay.
Yeah, I mentioned it in the last episode whenever we talked about her being unconscious, but I think in the last 2 episodes, but they do make a point to show whenever Hector 1 sees her that he sees her breathing, and we do get a slight audio cue of her breathing. So whenever she's laying there unconscious, we do know, the audience does know that she's alive and she's just unconscious and she's not dead.
Well, clearly I was not paying that close of attention, and I was watching it on my phone, so maybe I just didn't notice that.
And I do think that that's kind of one slight against this movie, especially in this section that we're really talking about today, because he is like looking for this woman, but that's not entirely clear, because at this point he sees, because it almost seems like he's just going back to his house, and he stopped by the fence, and he's trying to kick down this his fence, and we get a slight return of what I like to call like schlubby Hector, because he it takes him a few tries, and then whenever he does knock it down, he gets a bit of a stumble there. This is an action hero Hector.
No, definitely not.
And then he goes into his house. And we can tell it's his house because everything's still in plastic. And this, he sees the phone base, and I had forgotten. Whenever I was watching this earlier, taking notes, I was thinking that was like the answering machine. But then I just remembered now that it's like his cordless phone base. And then he rips it out because he realizes that the handset is missing. And so I believe he thinks at this point that the woman has the handset and she's calling the police on him.
Oh, that's right. Yep. Which her choice to climb onto the higher roof was a bit odd in my opinion. But you do you, girl.
Yeah, which we're not quite there yet. That happens a little bit later in this loop. But at this point, he's still chasing her. I think you kind of mentioned it, but like, what did you think that he was doing in this house? Did you realize that he was trying to find this woman?
No, I thought he was going home to either try and intercept himself or try and warn his wife. I had no idea that he was chasing after the girl from the woods.
Yeah, and I agree that I think
that's what he was doing, right?
Yeah, he's looking for this woman.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, well, and maybe I'm confused at this, but the first time, and you've probably already talked about this in your other episode, but the first time he goes through the loop, he sees the bandaged man,
Mm-hmm.
and unless I missed something, which is highly possible because I have a squirrel brain, but he runs through the woods and comes across this woman, correct? If I'm remembering right?
Yeah, the first, yeah, Hector 1, he sees her through his binoculars
On the ground.
as she undresses, and then
That's
he
right.
goes to find her, and then whenever he finds her, she's already unconscious and naked on the ground. And then Hector, and then bandaged
he sees the
Hector
second.
gets
Yep.
stabs him.
Right. And then he runs to this scientist's
to the lab. Like the time machine lab.
Right. Which I thought was kind of interesting. And I know we're not on track with the second part of the time loop. But the only reason I like noted it in my head was because I was like, okay, so why wouldn't you just run home? Why would you like run aimlessly into like this laboratory and break in? And maybe he just, for story's sake, he wasn't thinking he got stabbed. He ran into the first building he could find, but he wasn't that far from his own house. So when second Hector ran to his house instead of the lab, I was like, okay, I was like, okay, maybe he was trying to like change the loop somehow and find himself, because the whole point of Hector 2, his plan was to take out Hector 1.
Yeah, Hector 2's plan was to make sure that Hector 1 gets into the time machine.
Okay, gets into the time machine. All right. I was really under the impression that he was trying to take him out so there would be only one Hector left.
Yeah, I mean, in a way he was, but
essentially,
he was trying to take him out by having him go into the time machine and become Hector 2, basically.
Himself.
Yeah, basically that's his version of closing the loop.
Got it. Okay.
And now this Hector 2, I believe, he thinks that the Hector 1 situation is taken care of, and so he thinks that he's fine to go back home.
Right.
Except that he's created this situation with this woman because he basically attacked her, and now she's roaming free, and he thinks that she's going to call the police on him, and so he has to stop her and try to explain things. And he goes upstairs and he gets hit by this table that we saw Clara putting together, which I think is funny because it's coming from upstairs, even though the whole conversation they were having was that it wouldn't fit in the bedroom.
Oh, which I find hilarious. Like I'm a Tetris kid. Like my brain is like, I can like see how things fit spatially. So when he's like, I don't even think you can get that through the door. And I'm like, it's a table. Like legs in, pivot, legs in. It's no, come on, Hector. Like, I know you ain't got a lot going on upstairs, but the woman can get a table in a damn doorway.
Yeah, that's what we were thinking
it's
too.
It's like a little side table. It's
a tiny little table. I couldn't believe that it wouldn't fit through the doorway either. But I believe what we came up with in that first episode is that she just said that it didn't fit in the bedroom because she knew that Hector was tired and didn't want to go out for dinner, and so she just said that it didn't fit so that way she would lose the bet and she would go get dinner for them.
Oh, okay.
So she was just,
humoring him a bit, maybe?
Yeah. Just so that way.
Typical wife thing to do.
Yeah. And then he goes back up to the bedroom, and I do think that I don't fully understand Hector's thought process in a lot of this house chase. It's weird to call it a chase because we don't ever get a clear view of any other person.
Right.
We really only see Hector 2. And we don't see who threw the table, whether it was Clara or this unnamed woman or Hector 3. We don't know who threw the table at this point. And he looks out this window, and then he sees like a ladder. So I'm guessing that he thinks that the woman climbed down the ladder, and again we get this moment of schlubby Hector as he is, extremely gingerly, like trying to reach the ladder, and like he can't quite reach it because he's so scared of falling that he's like he's trying to hold on to the wall and reach for the ladder at the same time.
He was having a moment. He's like trying to save his own life, but also trying not to die in the process by way of falling down a ladder, which let's get real. Like, if there was a way he was going to die, I don't think falling down a ladder should have been his biggest concern.
Yeah, but luckily he's saved from going down the ladder by hearing noises back inside. So he's able to go back in through the window to find out, to continue the chase.
Right.
And so he goes up another flight of stairs. So I guess this is like a 3-story house.
It was pretty nice. I don't know with the housing market what he might have paid for that now, but he got a good deal, whatever he got.
I mean, this is in Spain. This is 2007 Spain.
I was going to say they have a landline. So I bet the housing market was probably really great back then. It's probably good. He probably got a good deal.
Yeah, I believe we couldn't figure out exactly what Hector did for a living. But in a previous episode, we figured that Hector and Clara do pretty well for themselves, and this could even be like a vacation house, like their second house.
Oh, sure. I would gather to say that Clara probably is the breadwinner of that family.
I could see that.
She gives me the impression that she's in charge. Old Hector is just living it up. He's the house husband, I think.
Yeah, and he goes up the stairs and he finds a blocked doorway, and I do love this little bit of like camera motion where for each shoulder he does 3 shoulder hits, and then for each one the camera like does a quick zoom in conjunction with the shoulder hit.
I guess I didn't quite notice that, but I'm going to probably rewind it and watch that. Only because it sounds like an interesting way to shoot that kind of shot.
Yeah, it's something that's it's a little bit more subtle, so you don't notice it too much unless you're really looking for it, because it does, like, it matches with the action of the scene really well.
Right.
And I like how they do that. And then he goes out on, a different part of the roof, and I think the other one looked like it was shingled, and this one looks like it's like the adobe tiles. Yeah, terracotta tiles. And he looks up on the next level of the roof and just sees basically a pair of shoes. And
Converse.
Yes, Converse.
Which is what the girl in the woods was wearing.
Yes, and I don't remember if we ever really get a good look of Clara's shoes to see what Clara was wearing on her feet.
I don't recall.
Yeah. And then he just grabs her and pulls her down, and she ends up falling all the way down to the ground.
To her demise.
Yes.
Yep. Which, when they showed the body, it was laughable.
Yes. Like, I do agree.
What happened to poor Clara that her entire head was turned around 360 degrees?
Yes, I think it's at the same time it is a very gruesome looking mannequin, but at the same time it is very clearly a mannequin.
Yeah, that is very true. Yes. I mean,
But yeah, the head, the neck is twisted
Oh
around
my
like it
gosh,
looks like
yes.
Play-Doh. Just
It sure does.
and
Yep.
the mouth is wide open, and then we see
Gaping.
and we see the short black hair, and that's covering her eyes, and we see Clara's red jacket,
Yeah.
and so
So,
Hector immediately thinks that it's Clara,
right.
and
That makes me think this twist ending has something to do with Clara.
yes,
Twist ending.
and I will actually spoil it here for you, even though I know you haven't watched the ending, but you said it was okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But
Totally.
just because this moment is really a bizarre thing to think about it, because it's Hector thinking that it was this unnamed woman, but then thinking it was Clara, but it actually
Right.
is the unnamed woman.
Why does
So,
she have a black wig on?
well, she doesn't have a wig. Hector 3 cuts her hair.
Oh, that is so weird. Okay.
And just to give you a little bit of, surprise, I won't tell you any more than that.
Okay.
But yes, that was actually the unnamed woman. But at this point, Hector too thinks that it's Claire because she has
I
the
thought it was
short
Clara
hair.
too. Yep.
Yeah.
I was like, well, he killed his wife. I mean, who else are you gonna kill, Hector? Jeez.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the film is, making you think at this point. And it even has the quick flashback where with Hector remembering the beginning of the movie, and it does this quick flashback does two things, which I think is great. It shows Clara wearing the exact same red jacket,
Yep.
so that again, reminds the audience where this red jacket comes from, and
Right.
helps put the idea in the audience's head that
Our
that
head.
was
Yeah.
Clara. And it also has him remembering her saying where she put the keys, that she left the keys by the door. So he knows where the keys to the car is, so that he can get in the car and go back to the time machine. And then we hear this peal of thunder in the distance. And
Yeah.
I like this because it ties all three loops together, because we get this moment that that this puts us back in a point in time.
Because I had forgotten that there was a storm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
that's well. I think we really only see the rain in this loop. Like
okay.
in the first one, we hear the thunder, and then I think at the end, the movie ends before it gets to the rain.
Okay.
But this thunder reminds Hector about the walkie-talkie, which I do think is a little bit of a goof, because he actually threw the walkie-talkie into the woods, like right after the tumble with the woman earlier.
Oh yeah, not in the field.
Yeah, so he shouldn't actually have the walkie-talkie at this point. But
I love a good continuity error. I'd live for them, actually. They're so fun to find.
Reminds us again back of the first loop, because we hear this bit of the conversation between Hector 1 and the tech.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay.
And then Hector 2 jumps into the conversation. And even though he explains it away, I do find it a little hard to believe that he jumps in so quickly that Hector 1, that we didn't hear this half of the conversation.
I believe that. Yeah. He does. He just jumps right in.
Yeah.
You're like, wait a minute. Wait.
Even though he says, like, whenever the tech's like, what if, I think the tech asks if, like, what about Hector 1? And Hector 2 is like, don't worry, Hector 1 set his walkie on the basement table and walked away from it.
Oh yeah, because it was supposed to be like on the kitchen table or something. Yeah.
And then just like 2 lines later, Hector 1 jumps back in the conversation. Is like, did I hear something?
Oh, no, nothing. Nothing at all. I was watching my telenova. Sorry. Distracted.
Yeah, and there's not really anything too exciting as Hector 2 jumps in his car and drives up to the silo. Other than we do get just a brief moment of him smashing through the gate, and
Oh, yeah.
it is, a little ways away. It's close, but it's a nice little stretch of road. So this seems like kind of a bigger area, with their house and then this little this little wooded area, and then the lab and the silo.
Yeah, because it seemed like when just the first time when you see him go in the woods and then he runs to the lab, it seems like it's very close to his house. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like he walked into his backyard, or he walked out of his backyard into these woods, and the next thing you know, he's in a lab. And I'm like, how does he not know? Like, I mean, did he not? How do you, like, this is in your neighborhood, dude. You didn't know this was here? I'm like, it was like, that's so close.
Yeah, he can
But I guess,
see the tower of the silo through his bedroom window through the binoculars.
oh yeah, because that's that like white ball thing
Yeah.
that he sees. Yeah. Well, that
Yeah.
does make it seem like it's much closer
Mm-hmm.
in the first scene where he runs into the lab for the first time.
Yeah, and then I do love this moment, that again he's playing up the memory of what he has to do, where he pulls up in the car, gets out of the car, and he goes up to the window where you can kind of hear Hector 1 and the technician talking to each other inside. And I just love like the little flourish that he adds. Like, he doesn't just like look through the window, he actually like pops his head up.
I laughed so hard at that. I laughed so hard at that because it looked like he was like on a teeter-totter. Like, it was cartoonish. It was like,
Yeah.
he bounced into the window frame, and then not only that, it cuts to the other Hector who sees him, and then back to him before he drops out of the window. And it was so funny. Like, the way, I don't know if they were trying to make it scary, but it was very cartoonish, and it was very funny.
I think it's funny. It doesn't. I think you added that moment in your head, because I'm looking at it right now, and it doesn't actually cut back to Hector 1 at this point. Like, the camera stays on Hector 2 outside the lab, and you just
Does
see him.
it?
Yeah, you just
Oh,
see
Lord.
him, jump up to pop his head through the window, and then he comes back down, and then he slowly walks to the like sidewalk, and then he sits down and just kind of boredly waits for Hector 1 to finish getting into the time machine and go back in time.
Maybe I'm thinking of a later scene, because do you see that scene again?
Yeah, they do flash back to it.
Okay. I'm probably thinking of the other time when they flash, because I swear, because I rewound it and watched it twice,
Yeah.
because I found it very entertaining. Now I have to rewatch it again. I'll text you later. I'll tell you where the time mark is on the part. I swear it's there.
And then we see like the runway lights on the path.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think power back on, and so he realize, or I think they dim and then get brighter again, so he knows that the time machine was just used. And the tech walks outside, and they start. I think it's funny that he calls him the pink mummy.
Mm-hmm. Which is funny how that gauze turned all pink.
Yeah.
Over a little bit of blood, which I thought was kind of humorous.
Yeah, I think it's we decided that it was the combination of the blood, which head wounds tend to bleed a lot, and
yes,
also
we're very
and also like the milky fluid from the time machine that was soaked in the arm bandage.
Oh, I forgot that was all squishy and yucky.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
The tech also calls him the first vertebrate who's ever traveled through time. Even though I'm curious if this is like a translation error, but I doubt it, because it's. I think it's funny whenever people talk about traveling through time, because technically he's the first vertebrate who traveled backwards through time, because everybody's always traveling forward through time.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
And
Or a bunch of
also,
time travelers.
yes. And it also means you probably didn't catch it because you were watching on your phone, but in the lab they have some x-rays on the background, and one of those x-rays is a lizard. So apparently they haven't tested it on the lizards yet.
Well, I guess not, because he definitely has a vertebrae.
And then the tech starts walking down, and he has this fun little moment talking about security cameras and how, that
It's like, I think I probably should get some.
yeah, he talks about how well the lie worked about the security cameras getting Hector 1 to get into the time machine, and then he's like, oh, maybe we should get security cameras. That would be a good idea.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
And then we have this conversation between Hector 2 and the tech, and with Hector trying to convince the tech to send him back in time, and the tech is asking him if he's trying to go back in time to fix something, even though he's like trying to stop him, which we don't know this yet, but we don't know this quite yet, but mainly because Hector 3 told him to stop Hector 2 from getting in the machine.
Right.
And that he does have a reason, and I'll leave you to find out the reason why Hector 3 told him that, because that's
okay.
another funny little bit.
I'm excited. I'm not even kidding. As soon as I'm done talking, I'm throwing that baby back on so I can get the rest of the story.
And then Hector 2 threatens to smash the time machine and goes inside.
I know, and the tech is like, go ahead.
Yeah, like at first he's like, go ahead, and he starts walking, and then he second guesses himself and then goes back, but right before he goes back in, he tosses the little battery out into the grass.
Yeah.
And Hector 2 is not really smashing anything, he's just doing very loud, just knocking over these empty canisters, which my guess is that these were the canisters that held like that milky liquid.
That fluid, yeah.
Yeah. But he's basically just making a bunch of noise, not really causing any damage.
Well, because he doesn't have... It wouldn't benefit him to actually destroy it.
Right.
Because he wants to use it. So, yeah, he's just all bark and no bite to try and get the technician back in.
Yeah, and this is a point where I think Hector really shows that he has some intelligence, because, for most of this movie, he's just been this kind of, middle-aged schlub of a man. But he does notice that one of these batteries are missing. It does help that, they are nicely lit up.
I mean, it's not always about function. You know what I mean, Bubba? Sometimes we want it to look nice, too. I want my time machine to look great. I mean, there's a reason Doc Brown chose a DeLorean.
Yeah.
Sexy. We want our time machines to be sexy. To backlight those batteries.
And the batteries do, like, they don't have, like the moving LEDs inside them, but they are very, like, high-tech glass-looking batteries.
Mm-hmm. They were cool looking, for sure.
Yeah. And Hector, smacks the tech in the arm with the crowbar.
That part made me laugh. I don't know why. He was like, it's like, I don't know where that battery went. Thunk. He was like, ow, sorry. I threw it in the field. Like, he just gives up right away. He was like, oh, well, okay. If he's going to hit me with a crowbar.
Yeah, and...
I better just give in.
Yeah, although he's not quite ready to give in at this point, but he does give in pretty soon, like once he figures things out. But at this point, Hector finally decides to take off this pink bandage and like makes a real show of it, and we get to see Hector's pretty beat up face at this point. He's got, and this makeup looks much better than the mannequin makeup.
Really good. Yeah, I will agree with you that yes, his makeup looks great actually.
Yeah, because he looks beat up, but he also looks like he's still very functional. Like he's got the bloody nose, he's got the beginning of a black eye, and he has that head wound, which it looks really nasty, but it also looks like it's reasonably stable at this point, where it's kind of got the slightly scabbed up blood, so it's not bleeding anymore, but you can tell that he's gonna need stitches for that.
Oh yeah, at least a butterfly bandage. I mean, at the very least. They did a great job. That was really great makeup.
Yeah. And we go back outside with the two of them, and they have a bit more conversation about the mechanics of time travel. And the tech's, he's like, time travel doesn't solve problems. It creates
more problems. Yeah.
Yeah. And he mentions that Hector 2 can only go back to a time that from when the time machine was turned on. Like, he can't go back to when the time machine was still turned off. And he only turned on the time machine moments before Hector 2 appeared. And then with a little bit more prodding, he says, specifically 30 to 40 seconds before. So he only has like a window of 30 to 40 seconds. And then the tech also theorizes that if things go wrong and Hector is able to change things, it will create a timeline with 3 Hectors all at once that will create a series of events beyond his control. And I love that line in this movie because that really goes along with what I've said about this entire season with these 3 movies that all have this similar style of time travel, because this Hector is really in events that are already beyond his control.
Oh yeah.
Because these are things that have already happened, and he's just living them out and making them happen as they have already happened.
Right.
And I just love that concept and how it's explained, and it's like such a throwaway line too. They don't really focus on it, but it really wraps things up neatly in this style of what I like to call like fatalistic time travel, because this all happens through fate.
Right. Well, and I really liked as he's replaying, he like earlier in the time loop when he sees himself looking through the binoculars from the woods, and he has the girl in the woods and he's telling her exactly how to stand and what position her head should be in, and you're like, okay, so what he had seen prior was just him setting up. So it was all him to begin with, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's what's referred to as a bootstrap paradox, because basically if he goes back in time, like the tech says that he's doing all this because Hector 3 showed up 30 to 40 seconds before Hector 2 did and told him to act surprised and lie about seeing him. And so basically the events of this entire movie all started because of what Hector 3 has done. And if Hector 3 didn't do any of this, then nothing in this film would happen. And so it's this paradox, because Hector 3 doesn't exist yet from Hector's point of view, but Hector 3 is what made everything happen.
Which is crazy, because it, which is why it's a paradox, right? But like it shouldn't, like the third or the first shouldn't be experiencing what the third one has done. When it's hard to explain, but it's wild. It is a wild way to think about like time looping.
Yeah.
Like that's just bonkers, bananas, crazy.
Yeah, and I do love this style of time loop. And if you haven't seen the other 2 movies that I'm kind of grouping together in this season, they all have a similar pattern. The one before this was Time Loop, which was in 2019. It's kind of the least of the 3, and then and it's also kind of the least horror thriller. It's more of a drama with a little bit of a comedy mixed in. And then Triangle was the first one that I covered, and Triangle is another really good one, and it focuses more on the horror aspect. It's more of a psychological horror, but they all follow like a very similar pattern, like with the multiple main characters coexisting at the same time in these time loops.
Okay, I'll have to check them out.
Yeah,
because I really enjoyed this movie. So I think Triangle I think I should watch next because I'm in a kind of a horror state of mind recently. So that'll be next. I'll watch it. I'll give it a try.
Yeah, I think Time Loop is okay, but it's also skippable. But I would definitely recommend Triangle.
Rad. Okay, I'll check it out.
And then we get another crowbar whack in the arm. This one a bit harder. That one was kicked off by another, I think, nice moment of insight from Hector, because he starts questioning. He realizes that something is off and asks why the tech is trying so hard to keep him out of the time machine, even though he he started this before he even asked to go back into the time machine.
Right.
And
like you threw away that battery before I even asked to go back in. So like, why? What do you know?
And so like, I do like that sign of intelligence that Hector figures it out, and then after Hector figures things out, and the tech starts explaining the whole situation with Hector 3, then the tech finally figures out, well, if Hector 3 told me to do all this, then Hector 3 must exist, so that means that Hector 2 must eventually go back and become Hector 3 because it's already happened.
Right. Yeah, when Hector, what we know as Hector 2, goes into the time machine, and however long he's in there, you hear knocking, and right? Like he's knocking. Did you hear that, or was that just the machine?
I actually don't remember.
Because when I watched it, he gets in and he's only in there for not even a full minute, and you hear knocking, and the tech looks confused and he opens it, and that's when Third comes out and tells him I'm the third Hector, which is weird because I was like, well, like you are. Or are you the second Hector? You just got in there. You also don't have a shirt on. And then when it closes again and he's hiding behind, well, he's not even hiding behind it. He's just like saddled up next to part of the machine in a shadow. Like no one will see me over here. Yeah.
Yeah, before Hector 2 gets into the machine.
It's weird.
Yeah, we get another flashback from the tech's point of view. And we flash back
of a hand. You see him. Yeah.
And I kind of love this because it's, we flash back to whenever Hector 2 first came out, and then it has like a freeze frame, and then it zooms into this hand.
On the hand, yes.
Which we actually did discuss. It is extremely brief. It's only on there for like, 0.2 of a second. It's only on there for like 4 or 5 frames, but that hand is visible the first time around whenever you're watching the film.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, so it does exist, and then afterwards we have, which it's kind of weird to explain because it's from the text point of view. It's a flashback, because he's flashing back to earlier in the day whenever Hector 3 calls him on the walkie-talkie and explains everything. But for the audience, it's a flash forward because it's something that we're going to see later in the movie whenever we actually follow Hector 3. So it's this weird narrative device where it's a flashback and a flash forward all at the same time.
At the same time. Oh, that's interesting. Keeping us on our toes.
Yeah.
This guy.
And once again, like right after that flashback, that's when everybody's finally on the same page. But at this point, the battery is still missing, and Hector 2 gets another moment of random inspiration that he realizes that the walkie-talkie that he's currently holding is the same one that Hector 3 must be using, or must have used. And so he drops it on the ground, and then I think he realizes that he's leaving things up to fate. And, he asks the tech to shine the flashlight on the ground where he dropped the walkie-talkie. And that happens to be the battery.
Right. Coincidentally.
Yeah. Which I think again, it's like, Hector 2 realizing this is all happening because of fate. And so it's himself giving himself up to fate and letting things play out the way that he knows that they have already played out, because he's, through most of this loop, he is basically already given in to doing things because they've already happened. Like he feels like he's already kind of trapped in this loop because what he's done has already happened. And then at this point, like whenever he went back to his house, he didn't realize, like he thought that he was moving on a new path. But now at this point, he realizes that no, he is still stuck in this loop and he has to go back in time again. And so he realizes that he's still stuck in this like fatalistic loop. And so he's just leaving things to happen as they've already happened. And so he's just kind of letting fate do what has already been done.
Which is smart on his part.
Mm-hmm.
Finally. Finally, Hector. Just going with the flow. Because, the whole time he's like, I have to do this because this is how it was the first time I saw it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now he's like, well, now I'm doing this because I know that Hector 3 exists, so I know that all this has to happen. And so, now I'm doing it in this way.
Right.
And it starts raining, and then they, casually go back in. He takes off the trash trench coat, and then he steps inside the liquid in the time machine, and then takes off his outer shirt, and calmly, tells the tech to close the lid so he can go back in time. And that's where this loop ends.
And that's where it's done. And actually the knocking happens a few seconds after he gets into that, calmly gets into the time machine again. So you'll have to look and rewatch that little part and see if it's just me. Do I think I hear knocking? or if it really is him knocking to let me out.
And I do I'm looking at this shot like right after the time machine, like the tank fully closes, and you can see all the blue containers like knocked around all over the floor that we saw him knock over. But also in the background, you see all the like metal, like milk jug kegs on a shelf, all jumbled in the background. So he apparently knocked the metal jugs down first because they would have been much louder.
Oh, yeah.
And that was like the first noise that he made to get the tech to come back.
Interesting.
But like I said, that ends this loop. So is there anything that you want to say about this section of the movie?
I just think it's really interesting. And I'm going to have to go back and rewatch little parts of it, but that Hector 2 just kind of giving up to fate is kind of interesting at this point. And I'm really interested to see what's going to happen at the last like 20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, you really see Hector change as a character, because at the beginning he was this like, just this practically incompetent schlub, just kind of bumbling about as things are happening to him. And then by the end of it, he is much more self-confident, and he is...
I was going to say confident in what's going on.
Mm-hmm. because
Excellent.
he knows what's going on, and he knows what has to happen, because like like we both said, he's given into fate by the end.
Right.
And I think that's interesting as a character, even though it doesn't exactly make him a good character, considering all the
No.
things that he's done throughout these loops. And we never really know like the cause of a lot of these events, because these are like, it's that bootstrap paradox. Like, all these things are happening because they've caused themselves to happen.
That's wild. Yeah. Like, just to think about it, it's just so interesting and so complex to think like that's only happening because of something that hasn't happened yet, which
Yeah.
is weird. Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm I'm excited to finish this up with with one more episode looking at the next loop. But I'd like to thank you again for talking with me today, and joining me on this episode of talking about Timecrimes.
Thank you. And thanks for giving me a movie to watch that is totally out of my wheelhouse. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad that you've enjoyed it so far, and I'm sure you'll enjoy finishing the movie, and hopefully you'll enjoy Triangle as well. And for anybody else listening to this who hasn't heard you over there on Cinema Recall, why don't you go ahead and take a moment to plug that, and any other social
Yeah.
media or any other projects that you have that people listening might be interested in.
Sure. So we, Vern and I do a podcast, Cinema Recall. You can find us on most streaming apps. Our website is cinemarecall.net. You can find us on Instagram at cinema.recall, and myself, Massage Mom, on Instagram. And Vern and I are also in a band in Minneapolis, so your ex-girlfriend. So check us out.
All right. Yeah, it sounds great. And I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightsitesandmovienights.com. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can also find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that and discuss episodes as they come out, and you can also have any sort of discussions on time loop movies, TV shows, anything time loop related is welcome there. And so until next time.
Soy Hector 3.
Hector 2.
Hector 1. Soy Hector 3.
Hector 2.
Hector 1. Soy Hector 3.
Hector 2.
Hector 1. Soy Hector 3.